One of the biggest puzzles for me is this. Why do so many Indian women, especially Indian women living abroad, respond to Narendra Modi almost as if he represents not just a political leader, but a civilizational savior? Whenever he visits the US, Europe, or Australia, we see them welcoming him dressed as Bharat Mata. They say India is becoming a Vishwaguru, India has made enormous progress under his leadership. But when you look at the condition of Indian women, you start to see the problem. India can present itself as a rising power, but the everyday reality of many Indian women is still shaped by violence, control, dowry, fear, and family pressure. So in this video, I want to show you what serious research says about dowry and the situation of women in India. The first paper appeared in the American Economic Review, one of the most respected journals in economics. The paper studies dowry violence in rural Karnataka, and what it shows is deeply disturbing. It shows that dowry works like an extraction. The wife becomes a way to pressure her parents. She becomes a hostage inside the marriage. Her suffering becomes a bargaining tool. She's abused because her pain can be converted into money. The paper finds that women from wealthier families are more likely to be beaten because the husband knows that there is more money to extract. But if the woman's family has already given higher dowry at the time of marriage, the probability of violence goes down. In other words, violence is linked to payment. And then there is another finding that tells you something very dark about the Indian family. The presence of a male child significantly reduces violence. Each additional son lowers the risk of violence by around 10%. But daughters do not have the same protective effect. So even after marriage, even after becoming a wife, even after entering the husband's household, a woman's safety is shaped by whether she produces a son. Now, some people may say, okay, but this is an old paper and it is based on rural Karnataka. Maybe this is a very specific case. Maybe the problem is not so widespread anymore. And that would be a fair objection until we come to the next paper. This paper appeared in the Journal of Development Economics, another serious academic journal, and it studies a much larger pattern. It uses data on more than 100,000 births in India and asks what happens to girls when the cost of dowry goes up. Now, how do they measure the cost of dowry? Through gold prices. Gold is central to dowry in India. Gold jewelry is not some minor symbolic gift. It is often one of the core parts of dowry. So when gold prices become expensive, the expected cost of marrying off a daughter also becomes more expensive. The researchers first show that the dowry values rise strongly with gold prices. The estimated elasticity is around 0.8, meaning that when gold prices rise, dowry values rise substantially too. So gold price shocks become a way of measuring the financial burden of having a daughter. And then the findings become very uncomfortable. Before prenatal sex detection technology became widely available, roughly before 1985, an increase in monthly gold prices was associated with higher neonatal mortality among girls. Neonatal mortality means that the girl child dies within the first month of life. So before ultrasound, when families could not easily know the sex of the child before birth, the burden appears after birth. More girls die in the first month. But after ultrasound became widely available, the pattern changes. After 1985, the same gold price shock is associated with a decline in probability that a girl is born. In plain language, this means that when the expected cost of dowry goes up, Some families appear to avoid that future cost through sex-selective abortion. So the violence moves location. Earlier it happened after birth, later it moved before birth. And this is the truly brutal part of the story. The price of gold in global market becomes connected to whether an Indian girl survives. The paper also looks at girls who were born during periods of high gold price inflation and survived into adulthood. These girls were significantly shorter as adults. Boys born during the same periods did not show the same effect. That is because adult height reflects childhood nutrition and health. So this is not only about whether the girls survive, it is also how they are treated after surviving. And the pattern is not random. The effects are mainly found among Hindus, where dowry has historically been stronger, and they're more pronounced in northern India, where son preference is also stronger. And they are driven by the bottom 60% of the households in the wealth distribution, where a rise in dowry costs can create a serious financial burden. Now, at this point, some people might still say, fine, but you're talking about old research. What about the last 10 or 15 years? Has India not changed? And yes, the numbers have changed. Dowry deaths have declined. In 2011, India recorded 8618 dowry deaths. In 2023, the official NCRB figure was 6,156 deaths. So yes, the trend is downward, but this is wrong comfort, because even after the decline, India is still recording nearly 17 dowry deaths every day. That is roughly one dowry death every 90 minutes. A crime that should have disappeared decades ago is still happening with horrifying regularity. And remember, these are only reported dowry deaths. They do not capture all forms of dowry harassment, domestic violence, psychological abuse, suspicious suicides, or everyday pressure placed on women and their families. So when I see some Indian women abroad loudly celebrating India as Wish Guru, I genuinely struggle with this contradiction. What kind of society celebrates women in functions but treats daughters as financial liabilities in marriage markets? What kind of culture says Beti Bachao but still asks directly or indirectly what the girl's family will give? This is why I find the spectacle so disturbing. Many of the loudest defenders of this new India are women who've escaped some of its harshest social realities. They live in societies where the law, labor market, and family structure give them more freedom. So is this their delusion or hypocrisy, or do they turn a blind eye? What is it? Thank you for joining me on The Devil Wears Data. I'll see you next time with another important idea.